Welcome back to another episode of Between the Freight Lines, a podcast posted here at Rogers & Brown. My name's Berkeley Brown, and today I'm joined by Lori Mullins, our Regional Director of Operations. She's fresh off the conference circuit and bringing back some key insights from the sessions and conversations happening across the industry. Hi, Lori. How are you doing today?
Doing great.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the conference that you just attended last week?
Sure. So I am a part of the National Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association of America. And every year they hold their annual conference. And so I attended the annual conference in my home state of Texas, in San Antonio. And we were joined, I think there were close to 700 in attendance this year, 680 some odd. And it was from customs brokers and freight forwarders to trade attorneys and a lot of vendors, bond companies, AI companies, you name it. So there were a lot of people in attendance. It was a great conference.
That's awesome. So you said that there was a lot covered: CAPE, 4811, Section 232, AI, and some of the PGAs. Can you go into a little bit more detail about that?
Sure. So first of all, there was a lot covered on the CAPE area. Obviously, CAPE is a big deal right now. Importers looking to recover refunds for IEEPA tariffs that were paid and declared unconstitutional. So, and from that realm, there was a lot covered related to 4811s and how to handle those CAPE refunds, as well as what the system was going to look like and how to get the best reporting done for those CAPE filings. It's really as simple as just filing a CSV with entry numbers. But unfortunately, there's a lot of little caveats and areas that are not covered in phase one that'll be covered in later phases, such as reconciliation. The reconciliation flags are not covered in phase one. Liquidated entries that are from beyond the 80-day mark, if it's been 80 days or greater from liquidation, then those are going to be handled in a later phase. So there's a lot of little things that are not going to be covered that will be covered in future areas. So those are definitely a hot topic of conversation, not just on the panels, but in discussion as well.
What were you hearing from the trade community? Are people feeling ready for these changes, or do you think that there's still some uncertainty?
Well, I think, as it relates to the refunds, from a customs broker standpoint, obviously, there is a lot of trepidation about how the filings are going to occur from a legal standpoint. There's an attestation that is made at the time of filing that covers civil and criminal penalties, and not just for the company, but for the individual. So how that is going to be handled was a big topic of conversation. And as you know, Berkeley, it's been a really tough year for for the trade community. But customs brokers have taken a real hit as far as staffing is concerned. So how do we handle CAPE filings? The customs, where staffing is, at a bare minimum, a lot of people have left the industry altogether. So, the entry filing is a lot more complex. So because of the complexity of that, our staff aren't really, none of us are sitting around with extra staff ready to be able to do these filings. So the final decision or announcement that CAPE was ready was made just before we left for the conference. And so I think a lot of us were saying, okay, how is this going to happen when our staff are so busy right now, just trying to keep freight moving for our clients? So that was a big topic of discussion. So I think really, I don't know that there's uncertainty about refunds. I think that's going to happen. There was a question of, is the system really going to keep running? Is it going to go down on day one? And thankfully, this is being recorded after day one is complete of CAPE. And it's really turned out really much better than a lot of us thought.
Definitely. And from an operations standpoint, where do you see the biggest challenges with implementation?
I think the biggest challenges are with the reporting side of things. And how that was going to roll out and how that would work. So, most of the brokers realize that we're not the only broker working for our clients. So, a lot of the importers use multiple brokers. So, I think, how is the importer making sure that every broker is filing on their behalf and making that clear as a customs broker? How are we communicating that to our clients that if they do choose to hire us to file the CAPE filing for them, that they're going to have to reach out to every customs broker that they work with and make sure that those individual customs brokers are each making a filing on their behalf, or they could leave some money on the table.
We've definitely seen that, and I know our customers have not seen the end of our CAPE emails and newsletters, so we will see how this all works out towards the end. You also moderated a panel for Section 232. Can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Sure. I've shared with a few people. I don't know how I got this title, but over the last year, somehow I have become the 232 gal, which I don't really mind. And I think because I sit in Houston, which is one of the largest ports in the United States for bulk steel imports, build a lot of refineries and that. So there's a lot of pipe and tube and wire and coils that are imported through the Houston port. So somehow I have ended up being the Section 232 gal. So I did moderate a panel on 232. I don't really know what to think about it, but 1 week before we were ready to give our presentation, this administration completely flipped the switch on us. So 232 was completely changed 1 week ahead of our panel. So we had to regroup and reassess and really rebuild the entire presentation, which worked out fine. I think, for us, putting together that presentation, we had a very experienced customs broker as well as myself. And then there were two trade attorneys. We had Pat Caulfield from GDLSK was one of the panelists that joined me for that. Ryan Raynack from HG was the customs broker. And then we also had James Amex from Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg was also on that panel. So we got to share with everybody the newest changes with 232 and how that was going to impact the trade.
This administration has definitely made everyone to expect the unexpected. I know, I've seen all of y'all always just waiting for the next shoe to drop. What were some of the key concerns or themes that came out of that discussion?
Well, so really with the 232, I think the biggest takeaway and the changes that took place with the 232 was the switch to declaring the full value of a product or derivative to assess the duties versus the content. And to be real honest, I think that adds a layer of or removes a layer of complexity that was there before, and and the importers having to provide the breakout of steel and non-steel content for the customs entries to provide to the brokers. But there are still a few other things that were, I think that came in that there's still a little bit of question. And that one of those is related to the 15% de minimis. As it stands right now, we know that the 15% de minimis is by weight and does not include goods in Chapter 72, 73, 74, and 76, which basically are the full metal items. So those were a few little things that really changed. There are some little carve-outs for countries of origin, including U.S. origin steel, which now pays 10%, and then some other country impacts for steel, aluminum, and copper. Also added manufacturing drawback. It's a very tight exemption to some of the items, and it doesn't apply to everything. And this was a great one. It removed the quarterly inclusion process to add to a new products to the scope. So the administration can still add products, but it's not on a quarterly basis. So one of the good things also is that it removed about 147 tariffs altogether. So that was a great change. So a lot of the items that were falling under the derivatives list actually came off. So some great things took place with the 232 panel. Sorry, I know I am discussing mostly the 232 because, again, that's kind of my thing. Sorry about that.
No, definitely. You keep us all in the loop. And Lori, do you feel like importers are still getting ahead of these changes, or do you think that they're still reacting as things happen?
Well, I think that, as the first week or two of implementation, so these changes went into effect on April the 6th for 232. And really, I think, the first week we were working out a lot of the kinks. So there were issues with ACE. There was some back and forth with importers on, what is or is not needed now. And so I think that importers now, I don't know that there is any getting ahead of changes when they come at you rapid fire, right? So this was another one that we were notified of, at the end of a week, and it went into effect at the beginning of the next week. So I think in all honesty, I think reacting as things happen, but able to pivot a little faster now because they know that these things will come at you. And I think the communication is there with a lot of the suppliers and manufacturers that, hey, I'm going to need you to provide information, and I need deeper input level detail that maybe you weren't providing 2 years ago. So I think that that's been a huge thing, is the communication between the importers and their suppliers. And then maybe, the downline second, third, fourth tier suppliers that supply the inputs for the manufactured items.
And then shifting a little bit to a hot topic right now, AI and customs brokerage. How are you seeing that to start being used by brokers?
Well, we keep seeing new things come out from customs on rulings related to use of AI and AI tools by parties in our space. And I think I will say that the conference itself was very heavily attended when it relates to AI and AI related businesses. There were a lot of people there providing various types of solutions that help with efficiency in customs brokerage offices. And I think we're all really looking for that. We need that. What used to take, let's say 30 minutes to prepare an entry is now an hour because the data is not all in one place. AI helps make a lot of that easier for us. So I think that importers and customs brokers alike are looking for tools. The reality is customs is now using AI. We know that for a fact. They have multiple different tools that they're using themselves, but they've really limited the tools that a customs broker can use in our space. So I think the general discussion amongst the customs brokers and freight forwarders is, how do we move forward and really kind of carve a path forward to change the rules so that customs sees the value of the use of AI in this space. So I think that that's really, where the importance is right now, is starting the discussion amongst the customs brokerage community about where can we efficiently use it. And then working with our importers. A lot of importers don't want the use of AI. So how do we build around those needs of the clients who say, I don't want AI touching, maybe they're concerned with cybersecurity or what have you, or have concerns. One of the key buzz phrases was closed or open loop, something of that nature. So in other words, does the data that you're a closed source or open source? So is the data that you're communicating in the AI space and the tool that you're using, does it source only from your data, or is it pushing your data out for other customs brokers? And I think that that's really an area where we have to be really careful about the use of AI and closing that loop so that it is not shared data.
And then in terms of real world use, where are you seeing that AI is actually helping today?
So I think that there are some great tools built around tariff classification, but I think the better, where the customs brokers would see the best use of AI is in documentation. So we really receive a lot of documentation through emails, and how is that managed and how does that data get into our system? So I think that, you know, eh, the data is being given to us on a document directly from the client. Right now, it's questionable about how that can be extrapolated and pushed into the customs broker system. So I think that it's an area that's still being navigated, but definitely one that I think is going to be hot in the future, and how that's helpful for the customs brokers.
Do you think that companies need to be investing in AI now to stay competitive?
I say that if you're not using some tools in some way to help make jobs easier for your staff, and that goes all the way around. Berkeley, I have always been a proponent for anything that helps make my staff's jobs easier. So I think that definitely any kind of tool that is going to be helping our operational staff work more efficiently is something that everybody needs to be on board with.
I agree with that. And I also think it overlaps with what we were discussing earlier with the countrywide entry staffing issues, and just making sure that the people that we do have on our team are being supported. Correct.
Agreed.
Definitely. So you also noted earlier that a new slate of officers were voted in this year. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So for NCBFAA, they brought on, so JD, who was the current president, his term was over. And so the nominating committee brought a slate of new officers in, and those were voted in and made official. And so Karen Damon from Mohawk has now taken the position as the president for NCBFAA. Steve Powell from CH Powell has taken the vice president position. And Lori Arnold from Jazz Forwarding is the secretary. The treasurer this year, newly voted in also, is Lynn James of John S. James. And I believe that's it. That's it for the new officers.
And how important do you think that these leadership changes are for the direction of the industry?
Berkeley, I feel like, I have served locally on the board for the Houston Brokers and Forwarders Association for probably 26 years or more. And I can tell you that, leadership is extremely important in these type of organizations because they forge a path forward. And I think that also, one of the great things that leadership changes do is they encourage the next generation of folks to stand up and to let their voice be heard. And I think the constant change of leadership in any of these positions is really important to the overall growth of the industry, because we want to see younger people step up. The reality is that in this industry, the majority of, the folks, and it's been proven, and I don't know the exact figures. I'm sure someone in HR could probably tell you that, but, most of us are aging out and retiring. So bringing in a younger generation that's going to kind of take over in the industry. And when we talk about things like AI and efficiencies, these are extremely important, and how we involve the younger generation in what we're doing. I don't know that a customs broker as we know it will ever go away. This responsibility that we hold as customs brokers will probably always be here as an expert, if you will, on the customs side. And I think that really helping the younger generation to understand what is around them, what is available, is also really important. So I think that, making these changes in leadership is also good, because it gives other people the opportunity to come in and really learn the organization and take over some of these roles.
That's a great point. And then what do you think that brokers and importers should be paying attention to moving forward?
I really think that we've learned a lot over the last year. I think when I started in the industry, a lot of the communications with Customs and Border Protection was at the local port level. That went away with remote location filing, and we're doing a lot more. And then with the building of the Cs, the Centers of Excellence and Expertise, I think, so what's happened is now over the last year, even though we're still working with the Cs, we also have a lot of involvement in our trade space with the different organizations that really you didn't see so much, like the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and BIS and some of these other organizations that are within our federal government. So because I think we're getting more and more involved with some of these other departments within the federal government, I think it's important to pay attention to where some of these decisions are coming from, so that we as an industry can make sure that our voice is heard, not just with Customs and Border Protection, but with the partnering government agencies and some of the other parties that are really a party to these transactions for international trade moving forward.
And then finally, you said that there was a session on CPSC with the changes coming July 8th. Could you go into some details about that?
Yeah, so there are some big changes. They're always adding into ACE new partnering government agencies with new information, important information. And so on July 8th of this year, CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, will be going live, and they will have new entry-based messaging through the One USG. So on July 8th, 2026, approximately 600 HTS codes that CPSC uses will now have flagging and require data. Some importers that import products that are subject to CPSC are going to need to go into the CPSC system and set up their e-filing. So they have to set up certificates electronically in the CPSC system. So what was not as electronic before has become electronic for the importers. So they don't want to wait. The importing community doesn't want to wait until July 8th to do this. It's definitely something you want to get in front of. And on the CPSC website, they have a tool. The CPSC is a little robot, and you can go in there and plug in details of your commodity to determine if it is subject to CPSC. And then, if it's one of those products that'll be flagged. And if you need to make sure that you get those certificates e-filed. So you'll then give your customs broker the e-filing. The importers will give the importers or the customs broker the e-filing details so that we can add that to our customs entry when we file those customs entries. So we definitely don't want to wait until July to make sure that all that gets done. It could potentially hold up shipments. So we definitely want importers who are subject to CPSC to get those all set up ahead of time.
Do you anticipate a smooth transition, or should the industry expect some growing pains with this?
Anytime a new PGA comes online, I think there's going to be some growing pains. I think that you know, if we can get the word out, we've done the best we could. So I think with Rogers and Brown, we send out trade alerts, we do webinars, we do just about everything we can to get the word out to our clients. So I just think that being proactive and kind of being ahead of the game and getting that information about the messaging set is going to hopefully save some problems, but there's always hiccups.
Definitely, and that's a great way to just plug our trade alerts again very quickly. You can subscribe on our website just to keep updated with everything that's been going on. We try to keep those pretty updated.
Yeah.
And then I was also happy to hear that you were able to connect with some perishable importers during a roundtable since the Viva Fresh conference was taking place at the same location. How was that?
Yeah, that was actually quite interesting. So, I've been involved with some perishable importers for some time now, and in the past, we've done a lot of avocados, we've done some citrus and so forth. And so we've really been growing perishables in the state of Texas. And so it just so happened to be that at the same time that our conference was going on, we were actually, I think we had 2 days left. The Viva Fresh conference, put on by the Texas Produce Association, was being held at the hotel, and the Port of Houston was doing a roundtable with some of the parties that are involved in perishable imports in Houston. So it was quite interesting. I think there's a lot of discussion taking place about, and this is been a lifelong discussion. I've been in this industry for, over 3 decades, and I will say that there has always been some amount of inconsistency between various ports in the United States and how they handle things, whether it was customs or agriculture or FDA. Through the years, there's always been some, I guess, varying degrees of difficulty between the ports. And so, I think one of the main topics of discussion was trying to develop a process nationwide where we have the same set of standards and we all follow the same set of standards across the board. So I think that was kind of the theme of the discussion, and just trying to have, standards nationally where all of the ports are working the same, and you don't get, maybe one port that has, an extensive amount of examinations and then other ports not seeing the same amount of examinations, maybe causing port shopping. So, those are all things that can happen. But if we can continually meet and discuss these issues and hopefully work with the port level folks, whether it's an agriculture issue, FDA or customs, meet with the proper parties and try to resolve some of those issues together. If it's something that we can help eliminate, we definitely want to be a part of that solution. And I think at Rogers and Brown, we've really tried to involve ourselves with industry organizations and participate where we can so that we are, seen as a part of the solution and not a part of the problem.
Are there any unique pressures in perishables right now?
I think the timing is always an issue when you talk about perishables. So, when there's examinations or you're facing problems like an examination, which we want examinations to be had. We want our food supply safe. We want to keep our forestry safe. So those are all things that are extremely important to all of us in the supply chain, here in this country. So we want to protect those things. But when you're talking about perishables, time is money, and every, extra day that an examination process is going on or a pest is being identified, those are hours of time that perishable is losing important shelf life. So I think that those are definitely, time is extremely important when it comes to perishables.
And then, Lori, you mentioned that this isn't a meeting that you usually get to attend. Did anything stand out to you that applies more broadly across the industry?
And I think if I could answer that one way, it would just be that attending this meeting, I saw that we still have a lot to do when it comes to bringing our ports together and kind of being on the same page and making sure that we all speak the same language when it comes to how our various agencies are handling various parts of the process.
Definitely. Well, Lori, I'm really appreciate getting to steal some of your time today. We don't get a lot of one-on-one time, and you're a busy lady, so I really appreciate it. There's clearly a lot that's happening right now across trade and compliance. So again, I'm so happy that you got a chance to join this conference to learn some more. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close up today?
No, just thank you for bringing me on today with you. I appreciate you allowing me some time to share with you and with our listening audience what we experienced and saw at the conference and in our meetings with the Perishable Roundtable for Viva Fresh. And again, just thank you very much for inviting me to join you.
Amazing. Thank you, Lori. We'll have you on soon.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Between the Freight Lines, a podcast produced here at Rogers & Brown. If you have any feedback or recommendations for future episodes, please feel free to reach out. Thank you. We'll talk to you all next time.
This podcast is for general information only and is not legal advice.